You love to train, but you're constantly in pain, and your current training isn't doing anything to help that. This month, Jared Slater, a former college baseball player, now strength and conditioning coach, joins the Move Pain Free staff for a discussion about centering your training around proper movement. Let's get right into it.
Welcome to the Movement Monday podcast brought to you by Move Pain Free. I'm your host, Joe Comer. This is your haven for learning how your body is designed to move, taking deeper dives into slow motion film analysis and simple exercises you can use to unlock your potential and move pain free for a lifetime.
Welcome to Movement Monday 17. Coach Mitch and I have the pleasure of welcoming Coach Jared Slater. Jared, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
So, Jared, you were a baseball player at heart, you played baseball in college, and now you get the chance to work with young athletes and athletes all over the place. So, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Yeah, so started in high school. I played baseball basically my entire life ever since I was 5 years old. But I played in high school, and that's kind of where my journey really started. I ended up getting hurt my senior year. I ended up getting a misdiagnosis of an elbow injury, which led to Tommy John during my second year in junior college. I played junior college for 2 years at two different junior colleges. Well, 4 years total, 2 years playing at two different schools. And then I transferred to a Division II school called Missouri Western and finishing up there and about to graduate. So that's kind of my baseball and school story.
Cool. Yeah, so today I wanted to get Jared on. Joe and I get sick of talking to each other about all this stuff. So Jared, we're just going to go into the problems that we see with the strength and conditioning area as a whole. We're going to talk about just very specific things that you see as issues, and then we can bounce off ideas with each other. And because we have a lot of ideas of what's wrong, you have a lot of different ideas of what's wrong. So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. But first, talking about that initial injury you had, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas? What was going on behind that?
So I think there's a lot of factors, but I think the biggest factor was I remember at the time there was this big sort of push to training in season isn't a good thing. You know, you got to prepare your body to play. And then so I guess they would call it wasting it, or using your time to train would diminish your, performance on the field. And so I think that's where it started. And then the way in which I trained, looking back on, was just so stupid. And it's partially my fault and partially, everyone else. Like during that time, no one was really looking at this new way of training. I was kind of, when I was playing in high school, that transition of high school to college, that was when this sort of football-esque training for baseball was coming in. So, lifting heavyweight, my first time ever being in a collegiate gym was junior college in the summer. And we ended up doing GVT for the first, and it was like destroy my body. It's basically 10 sets of 10 at, some heavy weight, and they made it worse. We did our first set till failure. So we basically exhausted the muscle and then did 10 sets of 10 trying to produce force. So, I mean, just stupid. And you're going to get stronger because, you're giving the body one of the most extreme stimuli that's ever been ever had. So you're going to get stronger, but my just getting hurt was just bound to happen. And so my misdiagnosis in high school, which was, they told me it was just a grade 2 and that it would heal on its own. I ended up getting this treatment called iontophoresis, which is, I believe it's a topical steroid that they put on. Did nothing at all. I rehabbed and came back and through, and then bullpen before we were supposed to start the season, my elbow just popped and I completely tore my ligament off the bone. So just hanging on literally by a thread. And then being a junior college athlete, like everyone, we decide to play through the season. And so I destroyed most likely my liver a little bit by taking some Advil, but you got to do what you got to do to play. And I was sick of not playing. And then also at that time is really when I kind of started training in a new way. And I think that's what actually was able to helped me to play and pitch through that was not this emphasis on super heavy resistance training and, oh, let's get you as strong as possible. It was more on this, hey, let's perfect your movement. Let's see what your movement deficiencies are. And then how can we use that to get you to pitch? So I got very lucky. I had an amazing trainer. His name was also Mitch, but he was really big on, let's look at the whole system, the whole body, how it all works together and work from the ground up. So we found out a lot of things about my body. I was a terrible mover. He said I was probably the stiffest person he's ever worked with. Couldn't rotate, no foot control, no pelvic control, basically all frontal plane dominant, like just terrible. Shoulders rolled forward, upper trap dominant, everything you could possibly imagine. I had, and so we had to go through that to try and get healthy. And I got healthy enough to pitch, but in the end, you can only get so healthy when your ligaments hanging off your bone. So ended up getting surgery, and then that's really where what you guys do, kind of going into this new style of training and this new way of not only style but thinking about training.
Yeah. And so we've mentioned this new way of training a lot in this podcast already. How would you explain the new way versus the old way? Because the people listening to this, they're sick of hearing us, right? How would you explain the difference between the old way and the new way?
I think the biggest thing that I see, I think the best way to explain it is that the quote unquote new way of training is this new way of looking at performance. So we're not looking at, okay, how do we train to get this muscle? We look, how can we train to get better on the field versus be a better athlete? Those kind of go together, but I think the big focus is on, to be a better performer, we have to be a more efficient mover, because we have to perform. Being better in your sport, in my opinion, ultimately comes down to speed. Being able to perform things, because at the professional level or whatever level you're playing at, speed wins always. If you can do everything faster than your opponent, you're 99% of the time going to win. And so that's where I think movement quality is the most important. If you have terrible movement quality, you can still move fast, but you're going to get hurt. And a hurt athlete isn't a good athlete, because a hurt athlete can't play. So you're no good to your team if you're hurt. So you have to stay healthy. And moving fast is going to make you that elite athlete. So this new way of training is, how do we perfect our movement to be the best athlete on the field, versus I guess you'd say the old way of training is, let's just train for performance. We need to be a healthy performer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to add to that, the old way was a lot of, how can I maximize my force output? How can I create force from 0 RPMs, basically torque? How can I, without starting with movement, produce movement forcefully? And it's really easy to do with the traditional implements, right? The barbell, doing the Olympic lifting styles, the classic back squat, front squat, deadlift type stuff. But like you were saying, efficiency is a huge thing in professional sports. You see the best players, they're the most efficient from movement to movement. And I think a missing piece, if we want to just hop right into a missing piece of it, is all, how do we accept, transfer, and then release force? Because that's what we're using our tendons for, our connective tissue, that fascial system that we're always talking about. How are we accepting that force and then using that force that we already have created, already have accepted into our body, to then perform another action? So yeah, like you were saying, it's task based, right? If you can do the task faster, more efficiently, you're going to be the best.
Exactly. And then going on with that too, like you talked about, I don't really feel like a lot of people understand what it means to accept force. Everyone always, like you said, talks about, how do we, generate as much force? How do we, if you're going to go in terms of VBT, how do we get to that 0.6 to 0.8 meters a second? Okay, now how do we get that to 0.9? How do we go speed, strength, speed? But now when people talk about accepting force, because in order to generate force, you have to accept force. It's the same thing with cars. You can only go as fast as your brakes. If you don't have good brakes, you can't accelerate at all, because you're going to accelerate, and then you're going to crash. And in my case, I crashed, but a lot of people too. Like, you have to be able to, if you can generate more force than you can accept, you're not going to be a healthy athlete.
exactly.
Yeah, you see that, especially in the baseball world. Ever since that the old, like where the old training in our minds has started to integrate itself into the sport, you see these athletes, they're getting hurt way more. And so you and I both, we talk a lot about Jacob deGrom, who is, he's a freak. He's fantastic at pitching, but when is the last time he's had a 30 start season, if ever? He always is hurt for an extended period of time, if not multiple times a year. We've talked about how, due to his inability to safely transfer that energy, like we're talking, he has managed to hurt, I think, every part of his body. And
Yeah,
so
like
it's incredible. It's incredible in its own weird, sad way, because we have here the best pitcher of our time in our generation currently, who is setting the record for the most different injuries in like the span of 5 years.
and to add on to that, it doesn't they don't even make sense. They're completely, irrelevant from one another. Like
Right.
he went from I think it was a teres minor to now his wrist. Like I mean I get kinetic chain, but there's almost no correlation
There's
between
there's no singularity there whatsoever. It's everything's just like all over the place. And that's
exactly.
with the new training, the goal then is to pair, as we say, pair those alike actions. Everything's moving together. That way we can perform that well. And, that way we can be as good as DeGrom is, but we're not missing 10, 15 starts every year in the eyes of the baseball world.
Yeah, I'd argue even more too. I mean, you can also look at other pitchers, or in general, if you look at pitchers, like this whole trend of, okay, how do we throw harder? And you look at guys that are throwing harder, but they're not throwing healthy. And this is where the pitching, like, and the coaches all come in and they're like, oh, I'd rather have a guy that's healthy and throws 82. Like, shut up. No one's taking a guy throwing 82 who's healthy. They're taking the dude who throws 95 and can pitch once a month. Like velocity wins. But with the same time, there are so many guys that have that in them, but just can't stay healthy. And it's not their fault. It's their training's fault. It's these guys are such freak athletes. And I talked about this. I think I talked about this on a different podcast, but this idea of, athletes are elite compensators, and kind of to dive more into that, is that maybe a good thing, or is it a bad thing that athletes are elite compensators? Some bodies are just better at finding ways around issues than others. And so like DeGrom, I mean, his issues go up and down, but he's such an elite compensator that even though his energy transfer is so terrible, he still throws 100 miles an hour, 101 miles an hour every game, or when he pitches for like 7 innings. Like, and so maybe that brings up the argument, okay, maybe elite compensators aren't a good thing. Maybe athletes need to be not good compensators and just learn how to move.
Yeah.
If they couldn't compensate, then we wouldn't see people like DeGrom probably.
Oh, 100%. You'd see more guys like Scherzer who are out there, throwing 200 plus innings every year.
Right.
I mean, Scherzer also, you got to look, is like one of a kind mechanics. Like, not everyone's going to move the same, but the principles that make Scherzer healthy, you can see glimpses of that in different pitchers. And then to bring it to other sports, Mitch, I'm sure you can provide tons of examples of guys in football, who like you can see that they have these glimpses of things that make them, elite, but then they don't have the rest of it. Elite is in terms of movement, not in terms of, as a football player, but in terms of movement. And you see like, oh, they just need to tweak this one thing and then they're going to be there. They're going to be healthy.
Yeah. And football is a really great sport to look at because there's so much lateral movement, so much cutting, and also so much full speed sprinting. So you see the full spectrum of movement, even the jumping part. You see the full spectrum of movement in football, and you'll see dudes who are having the soft tissue problems like the hip flexors, the hamstrings, the calf strains. They're fine at landing on the ground, but that soft tissue just isn't being used efficiently to transfer and leave the ground, that they're going to start pulling hamstrings. They're going to start having hip flexor problems. And then you see the dudes who they're freak athletes, but they're always down with a non-contact injury. They plant their foot and something pops, and it seems like nobody knows what's going on, but like we're out here preaching this all the time. It's how you accept force. Like there is a pattern that the body is sewn in, every tissue in your body is wrapped around something. It's a spiral pattern. So we need to move in that pattern. And like I was just saying, like Saquon Barkley, he's a really great example. He can lift the whole entire weight room. He can lift the house on his shoulders. But then he's out on the field and he plants his foot turned out and collapses to the inside edge of his foot, exactly how he trains to do in the weight room to accept force, and pop, ACL gone. And it's not a mystery to us, right? We see these patterns of movement that lead to injury. We see patterns of movement that lead to a lot of long-term movement health, and we can decipher between them and train for either one. But the industry, right, continues to train for the pattern of injury, the pattern of inefficient energy acceptance, transfer, release. And yeah, that's pretty much all we have to talk about, right? Like that's the whole point of our existence right now, for me anyway.
Yeah, I think too, football is just, I mean, you got to look at like professional sports draw so much money. And like if you're looking at today, like you look at how much guys are getting paid, and you're just like, if a guy's worth $250 million, why is his body built like a $1 bill? Like there's something going on when guys are, shelling out all this money, and the guys, and this is not to, shade on anyone who's working there, because they've obviously worked their butts off to get to where they are. But how come these guys that are in charge of, these athletes, how come these injury rates are so high? Like it's almost like mind-boggling how many big names. I remember I talked with my dad about this. He'd be like, yeah, all these guys are, getting hurt every year, all these big names. And he'd use basketball as an example and say, look at all this twisting and turning they're doing. And now, yes, twisting and turning can put your body, especially into a not good space, especially when you're driving to rim, you're going to get some contact there. But the body's meant to twist and turn. It's really meant to twist and turn. It's a spiral, it's a coil. And so, like, if you want to look up, like, perfect example of a guy who just cannot stay healthy, who does it, is Kyrie Irving. And you got to look at his training too, and just look at how much that he moves around. And he still gets hurt. And that dude is, when healthy, probably it's he's probably the best point guard in the NBA. And I'm a Warriors fan, so he's probably the best point guard in the NBA when healthy. When healthy, fully there, like fully on the court. We're not talking off the court issues. We're talking on the court when he's fully there. Dude's the best point guard in the NBA. But he is only on the court for what, 20 games, and they play an 80-game season. Like something's going on, and it's not the athlete's fault. Like there's something major. It's an epidemic. There's something going on in professional sports where the best athletes in the world are getting hurt at insane amounts, and not even like tiny things, because being a professional athlete in general isn't healthy. You're pushing the body to its limit, but you should be able to, get through the tiny things. But they're having major injuries. You're looking at rotator cuffs, they're just baseball rotator cuffs, labrums, Tommy Johns. You got other sports, you got ACLs, MCLs, just everything up and down. Every major injury you can have is happening more and more frequently.
Yeah. So rates, high injury rates, elite compensators, and we're encapsulating this under bad training. All the reasons that we have transitioned to a new modern wave of strength and conditioning. Mitch and I have talked about ours 100 times. We'd like to hear more about yours.
Yeah, so I'm approaching it more from a baseball standpoint. And I think that baseball is like the perfect blend of both sides of training, because it's the one sport that's really a purely movement based sport. And what I mean by that is you don't need to be the most jacked guy in the room to be an elite athlete at baseball. So if you look at football, obviously the dude who weighs 280 is going to destroy the guy who weighs 200. And that's just, force. Like the dude who's 200 pounds can be able to generate way more force than the guy who's 200 pounds, even though the guy who's 200 pounds maybe generates it in a healthier way, but the bigger guy is going to win. But in baseball, it's a movement based sport. Like bring up Jacob deGrom, the dude's probably what, 180 soaking wet with weights in his socks. And then you look at Spencer Strider. That dude is built. That dude's a unit and a half, and they both throw the same. So they both throw the same speed. Strider's obviously healthier, and I think his routine is much better. but they both have the same velocity and completely different builds, completely, which just proves that baseball is a movement-based sport. If you can master your movement, you can be good at baseball. And that's kind of how I like to structure my training is I like to have guys that are strong, but are baseball strong. Basically, they are strong for their body. Their body can support itself. They don't need to worry about, okay, I got to hit. There's this thing called the 90 mile an hour formula, which blew up. And Joe, I know you know what I'm talking about. Just blew up, and everyone was like, "You got to deadlift 4 plates. You got to do 2.5 body weight your pull up, pull down 300 yards." All this just crazy stuff. Then you just go down the list of guys who just don't fit the model, and then you can just throw that right out the window. Like it doesn't apply. So what I like to do is I like to have guys who move correctly, and once we get the movement correctly, then we get them strong. So I think the weight room can be used to correct movement. I don't think you have to correct movement by going to a PT or going and using all of these, apparatuses to fix how you move. If you need an apparatus to fix how you move, you just can't get into it. So there's no point in forcing your body into a position it can't get to on its own. So I like to basically get them strong and get them mobile, or not mobile, more like movable at the same time. So if we can move correctly, we can move through correct positions, and we can move through them safely, and we can move through them with power and with tension, then we're ready to build on that. I don't really like to progress guys who are showing some type of, movement dysfunction just because, you're hitting, let's say you're hitting 92 on the mound, but, every time you throw, you're having anterior shoulder problems. There's something going on in your chain that we need to look at. We need to address before we try, get you to 94, get you to 95. You have something that if we don't nip it in the butt now, a year, 2 years, 3 years, even 5 years down the road, you're screwed. Like you're going to have something come up that's going to, sit you out for a year and a half. And so that's where, correcting movement is super, super important. And most of my clients are remote, so I don't see them all the time. So I have to basically prescribe things that I know that they can't screw up. So I have to prescribe the movements and cue them correctly so that I know and I trust that this is going to fix their issue. And with throwing, a lot of times, you kind of have to you have to throw to fix your throwing. You're not going to fix your throwing not by throwing. So in order to fix these movement things, they have to get into those movement positions that they cannot get into, but we're adding some sort of, weight bearing or non-weight bearing, or we're changing the way they think about it in order to get them into that position. And so then with my in-person clients, with them, obviously, it's so much easier to, adjust things. You can fix things on the fly. You don't have to worry about, hey, I threw for 2 days and now my arm hurts. It's, hey, I was doing a landmine press and I, felt a little bit of bicep pain. Okay, cool. Let's see your setup. Let's see what's going on so we can fix it right then and there versus, letting the problem get worse for 2 or 3 days. And all of a sudden, you can't do anything about it. You got to go, stop throwing, you got to fix it. So I think my way of looking at training is let's get the athlete able to move. Let's get them ready. Let's get their body ready. Let's get their mind ready. And then once they can move, then we can build on top of that. Because you can only, everyone says this saying, it's so oversaid, but you're only as good as your base or your platform. If you don't have something good to build off of, you're not going to be good. So really making sure that they have a stable platform, and they not only are stable, but they understand what it means to be stable. Then they understand and they can, pump the brakes if they have to. So really giving the athlete a good understanding of what I'm looking for.
I like it. Yeah, and I liked what you said about you can use the weight room to correct movement too, right? And that's what we've been diving into a lot lately. We see movement issues, like the actual patterns that cause injury, in that weight room exercises. So what we've been working on lately is creating resistance training techniques that are actually pouring into that pattern of security just by their nature. So you're loading your body, but it's in the pattern of security. You're not feeding into that pattern of injury while you're gaining muscle, while you're gaining strength, explosivity, speed. And yeah, and a lot of what you said is exactly what we do, right? It's it's a recode. We're trying to recode our movement so that we're back in the pattern of security. Now everything we do is automatically good for us. We're moving correctly how our body's sewn. And now we're training to do our sport, to do all these very specific tasks in a way that's safe for our body.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I love the term recode. Like, that's such a perfect word to sum up, fixing movement. Like, your body is a system and you have to recode the system. Like, that is such a perfect way to describe it. And like fixing it, like, it's the idea that if it goes wrong and it's going wrong in the weight room, we can also fix it in the weight room. And when you tell athletes they can't, like, hey, the weight room is bad, they get such a bad, like, you don't want that at all. The weight room is not a bad place. The weight room is the best place in the world besides playing your sport. Like, the weight room is how you get better. Like, if you want to get better at your sport, you gotta get stronger, you gotta get faster. It's plain and simple. That's how you get better at your sport. And so I feel like now there's almost a stigma attached to the weight room where, hey, you're going to get hurt. Like, how many times have you, seen weight rooms and some coaches are like, this program's going to kick your butt. You're going to feel it every day. Like, you're going to wake up sore. Like, dude, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this to your athletes? Like, why are you telling them that you're going to feel bad? Why should you feel bad from lifting? Like, if you feel bad from lifting, you overworked yourself, you overtrained. If you're too sore to move, you did something wrong. So like you said, recoding and teaching them that, hey, the weight room is a good place to be is, that's what you have to do, especially with young athletes who, like, so many guys want to lift twice a day, 3 times a day. And you can only do that for like a couple of years. And after that, your body's just going to give out. So, give them some good habits and like teach them that the weight room is a good place. It's not, you're not going to get hurt. You're going to get hurt if you do stupid things. But if you, listen to your body, like you said, recode so that when you do move, you're going to move correctly. That's what you need to do.
To start centering your training around natural movement, click the link in the description for a free 3-day pain relief routine. And leave a comment, like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more information about how you can start making memories in life without the pain.